Don't make a sound, or I'll kill you. A hoarse voice sounded in his ears, and Li Shiming only felt a slight tingling sensation in the back of his neck. This is being controlled by someone with a sharp weapon. He never thought that he was kidnapped just after a walk in the back garden of the Nanling mansion, his own garden. Don't do stupid things, I don't want to hurt you, as long as you do something for me. The hoarse voice continued. Li Shiming didn't dare to move, and as the people behind him approached, a thick smell of blood entered his nose. The people behind him are very satisfied with his knowledge and practicality, and he doesn't have the spirit of a scholarly business and ignores his behavior. I don't know what you want me to do. Li Shiming asked calmly. Young Master Li, take this pill before helping me. The person behind him retracted his weapon and said. Then a hand brought a black pill to Li Shiming's head. Hearing the person behind him calling out his name, Li Shiming was startled. The other party dared to hijack him even though he knew his identity. Either he was a desperado, or he was absolutely certain. Although the tingling sensation on the back of his neck disappeared, he still did not dare to resist. This body is only a 15-year-old scholar, and he has never learned any routines except the radio gymnastics in his previous life. He took the pill from the blood, and without looking closely, he threw it into his mouth and swallowed it. Of course, he couldn't be so honest with taking pills of unknown purpose. The moment he swallowed the pills, he put the pills into the computer room with a slight movement of consciousness. The computer room space, a space to travel with him. 3 days ago, after he discovered that he had traveled through, he found that the computer room of the university library in his previous life coexisted with him in a strange way. As long as Li Shiming thinks of the computer room space, his consciousness will enter the computer room space. The core of the entire computer room space is a large server IBM Z15 composed of 4 cabinets, with a dedicated uninterruptible power supply on one side, and some maintenance tools in the tool cabinet on the other side. Because the uninterruptible power supply has no power, the large server IBM Z15 has been reduced to a display. However, he found that the computer room space can be used as a storage space, and he can put the items he touches into the storage space. When the people behind him saw Li Shiming swallowing the pill, he could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Li Shiming's identity is too convenient to do things for him. Others may be suspected of buying what he wants, but no matter what Li Shiming buys, no one will doubt it. Master, the pill you take is called Sanri Duanhun pill. If you don't take the antidote within 3 days, your whole body will rot and die in 3 days. You don't need to think about finding a doctor. The famous doctors of Nanling Mansion, they can't make an antidote within 3 days. The sound of a long sword being sheathed came from behind, and then a hoarse voice said. Can I turn around? I'm not used to talking to people like this. Li Shiming asked in a deep voice. Young master is so courageous. The person behind him praised and took a step back. Li Shiming turned around and saw a middle-aged man with a broken left arm. The broken arm was still bandaged, and a faint red oozing was visible. Li Shiming quickly thought of the big case mentioned by the young servant Mo Yan. Yesterday, a man in white from Tianxianglu killed 7 guards of the Weiyuan Security Bureau, and only the chief guard Wang escaped. What's more important is that the man in white had his left arm cut off by the man in white when he was fleeing. Boss Wang, can you tell me what you want me to do? Li Shiming asked in a deep voice. Being called out of his identity by him, Chief Officer Wang was not much surprised. As the son of the prefect, it is normal to know what happened to him. Tianxianglu was a big case that just happened. I don't have any grudges with the young master. As long as the young master helps me with my affairs, I swear to God that the poison of the sun will be cured. Poisoning is really helpless. Chief Guard Wang bowed his head slightly and said. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. There was an apologetic look on his face, as if from the heart. Li Shiming was not affected by this in his heart. He has been a human being in 2 lifetimes and has a very clear view of human nature. Regardless of whether the chief guard Wang was helpless or not, it was a fact that he threatened him with poison. "This is a prescription, please help me to buy the medicinal materials and brew them and send them here. I think that the young master is a smart person and won't do anything with the medicine. I can immediately know what is wrong with the medicine. The antidote for the Rijuanhun pill is gone." Chief Guard Wang saw that Li Shiming was very calm and was not influenced by him. Knowing that it was useless to talk too much, he handed a piece of paper to Li Shiming and threatened. "This piece of paper is very old. In addition to the quantity and age of various medicinal materials, there are also requirements on the cooking method. It will take some time to purchase the medicinal materials on the prescription. I will try my best to deliver the medicine at night." Li Shiming glanced at the prescription and said solemnly. According to memory, several medicinal materials in this prescription are very precious, and it will take a lot of time to use the relationship between the government and China. Although he was not threatened by Sanri Duanhun Wan, he still had to do a full set of acting. "Okay, I'll wait for you behind the rockery." Of course Mr. Wang knew that the herbs in the prescription were difficult to deal with, otherwise he wouldn't need to spend so much effort, just find someone to solve it. "I hope Mr. Wang will stick to his oath." Li Shiming put away the prescription, gave him a deep look and said. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, and Chief Officer Wang looked at his disappearing figure with admiration flashing in his eyes. However, Chief Officer Wang's admiration was quickly replaced by killing intent. He could not let Li Shiming live anyway, but he completely offended Li Shiming. Even if he handed over the antidote, if the prefect knew about this, he would have 9 lives. Not dead enough. Li Shiming walked unhurriedly on the garden path. It's not that he didn't think about speeding up, but he didn't know if the chief guard Wang was watching behind him. He needed to show his composure to calm the chief guard Wang's heart. After he left the garden area and saw his own yard, most of his worries were relieved. Now he is faced with 2 choices. One is to report the matter to his father. The original father is Li Wenyuan, the prefect of Nanling Prefecture. Although he is only a 4th rank, he is the most powerful official in Nanling Prefecture. With the power in the hands of his original father, Li Wenyuan, he was fully capable of inviting a master to kill the chief dart master Wang. Another option is to do what Chief Wang said, and boil the medicine according to the prescription. Let's deal with it first. If there is no way to solve the trouble, then ask my father to do it. He thought to himself. Anyway, the chief dart Wang wants him to do things, and he will not do anything to him for a while. With the broken soul pill for 3 days, the chief dart Wang will not be much wary of him. Entering the courtyard with thought, the maid Saiken saw Li Shiming, and quickly put the things in her hands behind her, and then smiled and saluted. Saiken is Li Shiming's personal maid. In addition to Saiken, there are 5 general maids and 2 maids who came to serve him. However, he didn't like the crowd in the yard. Except for the piano, the rest of the servants were in the servants' room, and they wouldn't come without greeting. "What are you holding in your hand?" Li Shiming asked curiously, looking at Saiken's shy face. "The gadgets sent by Wang Ma, I think I need a few to look good." Saiken took out his hand and spread it out, revealing the red beans in his hand. Li Shiming couldn't help shaking his head. No wonder Saiken was shy. This is acacia bean. It seems that Saiken has grown up and has the mind of a young daughter. He was about to ask Saiken to do something, but he was looking at acacia beans again. One end of these acacia beans is black, and he thought of chicken mother beads. Chicken mother beads are also a type of acacia beans, but they are highly poisonous, and eating 2 or 3 by mistake can be fatal. Of course, few people know about the poisonousness of the hen beads. The reason is that the acacia bean was born in the extreme south. Not to mention that the world knows that the hen bean is highly poisonous. Even the difference between the hen bean and the acacia bean is known to few people. Saiken, go to Grandma Wang's and ask how many black-headed acacia beans there are. If you send them out, take them back. Just say I want them, and give me what you have. Li Shiming ordered in a deep voice. Yes, young master. Saiken pouted a little dissatisfied, but did not dare to disobey his order, handing over the acacia bean in his palm. By the way, let Mo Yan come over again. Li Shiming explained when Saiken was about to leave. When Li Shiming came to the study, he first retranscribed the prescription given by Mr. Wang, only the amount of the medicinal materials. Incorporating the memory of the original body, his calligraphy is not bad. This world seems to be different from the previous life. The country he lives in is Xia, the text he uses is Chinese characters, and he even has the 4 books and 5 classics. It seems that this place has a great similarity with the previous life. The reason why Li Shiming knew that the 4 books and the 5 classics were the same was because both generations had read the 4 books and 5 classics in their memory. When I was in the university library in my previous life, I liked to read some ancient books. Although I didn't study the 4 books and 5 classics much, I was familiar with them. In this life, he has studied the 4 books and 5 classics since he was a child, and at this time he is already a scholar. His talent was not obtained by taking advantage of his father's relationship, but by relying on his knowledge and passing the exam. A 15-year-old scholar is not easy for ordinary people, but it is extremely easy for him who has a family background. Although it is not through the relationship of his father, who is a prefect, his learning conditions and resources are beyond the imagination of ordinary people. As long as you are not stupid, or you are unwilling to work hard, with such conditions, it is only a matter of time before you pass the academy exam and become a show. The geography of this world is also different from the previous life. Take Nanling Mansion as an example. In the history of the previous life, there was no such great mansion as Nanling Mansion. Nanling Mansion is located in the south of the Xia Kingdom. It is connected with the central capital in the middle and the Guanhai Prefecture in the north by a Xianzhang Canal. Together with the 4 palaces in the east and west, it becomes the 7 most important palaces in the Xia Kingdom. When Li Shiming was thinking about it, the voices of Saiken and the servant Mo Yan came from outside the door. Mo Yan walked in with great difficulty holding a wooden box, and carefully placed the wooden box on the ground in front of him. Young man, everything you want has been made according to the drawings, you can see if there is anything else that needs to be changed, I will do it right away. Mo Yan reported with a showy look. Li Shiming was excited, he suppressed his emotions and opened the wooden box. In the wooden box are the parts of the generator, which are all made according to the drawings. He just came over 3 days ago. In order to charge the uninterruptible power supply, he used his previous knowledge of electricity and designed drawings based on the memory of this life, and handed it over to Mo Yan for processing. Now Mo Yan just sent it over. Before he got it, he had already made preparations in his heart. As long as the difference was not too big, he could completely correct some mistakes by himself. But when he actually saw the real thing, he was still very surprised. Leaving aside the wooden parts, he looked at the iron gears he needed. At first glance, he couldn't tell that it was an item made by ancient society. Its sophistication made him suspect that it was processed by a machine tool. These things are not the most difficult. The 2 most difficult things in UU reading www.uuganshu.com are magnets and copper wires. He picked up the magnet and found that the shape of the magnet was completely qualified. Master, this magnet was made by Sinan's shop, and they chose their best magnet. Mo Yan explained when he saw the magnet. Sinan is a compass. Sinan's pointer needs to be processed into a special shape by a magnet. It is not too difficult to process the same technology into the shape required by Li Shiming. A smile appeared on Li Shiming's face, he nodded and picked up the copper wire. To be honest, what worries him the most is the copper wire, which requires the most technology. The copper wire in his hand is thin and soft, and the surface is covered with a large layer of paint. It was also a very good copper wire in the previous life. I ordered this copper wire from the Wu family's jewelry store. They heard that you asked for it, and they found the best old craftsman to make it overnight. Mo Yan didn't miss the opportunity to take credit. This matter is well done, Saiken, give Mo Yan 2 taels of silver. How could Li Shiming not know Mo Yan's careful thinking? He was also satisfied with Mo Yan's work, and ordered Si Qin with a smile. Saiken obediently took the money and gave it to Mo Yan, who was already laughing and couldn't close his mouth. Mo Yan, don't talk too much after going down, don't talk nonsense about the young master's affairs outside. Saiken confessed softly. Although she didn't know what Li Shiming wanted these things to do, but before he was about to participate in the autumn festival, it would be troublesome for the young master to know about these things that had nothing to do with his studies. Mo Yan, here is a prescription. You can buy the medicine according to the prescription, and you can move quickly. In addition, bring the case file of Tiangxianglu. Li Shiming looked away from the wooden box and thought of the important matter of looking for Mo Yan. Shen Sheng ordered. Mo Yan, who got a new task, left happily with silver. Saiken, you are at the door. Li Shiming said while looking at the curious Saiken. These parts can be explained as his hobby, but it is really impossible to assemble them into a generator. So even if the Qin showed curiosity, he couldn't let the Qin watch. Although Saiken was curious, he still obeyed his order and left the study. Li Shiming assembled the generator according to his own design. An hour later, the strange box on the desk looked like a box with a shaking handle, and 3 copper wires were drawn out from the other side, and there was nothing special about the rest. The main body of the generator is wrapped in a wooden box. Even if it is seen by outsiders, it will not pay too much attention. Li Shiming tried to shake the handle, and found that he overestimated the strength of this body. To make the voltage higher, the rotor of the generator needs to rotate faster. What he designed is to use a large gear to drive the pinion. Although this can make the rotor of the generator rotate faster, it also requires a larger strength to turn the handle. He wanted to let Mo Yan come over to help shake it, but after thinking about it, he still didn't do it. He turned the tremolo hard, although he said that his strength was too small to speed up, but when he saw an electric spark flashing from the copper wire that was let out, he knew that he had succeeded. After successfully making a simple generator, he knew that it would not fail after getting qualified parts. This thing is not complicated in the first place, and it can be easily copied after knowing the principle, not to mention that he is a quasi-professional. However, the biggest problem that Li Shiming has encountered so far is how to maintain the rotation of the rotor at a constant speed, and how to input the generated current into the uninterruptible power supply in the machine room. He looked at the simple generator and thought about bringing it into the engine room. The desk was empty, the generator disappeared and appeared in the engine room. He tried to use his consciousness to make the rotor of the generator turn. This inspiration came from the fact that he could manipulate the items at will after he had put them in the engine room. He had a feeling that he had extraordinary control over the interior of the computer room. This is very unscientific, but things like crossing have happened, and crossing with a server room cannot be explained by science. Under the control of his consciousness, the rotor of the generator spun, and the speed became faster and faster. Due to the backwardness of technology, the bearing part of the generator rotor is realized by wrapping 2 pieces of cooked cowhide and adding grease between the cooked cowhide. This technology generates heat when the speed is too high. At the time of design, he did not take into account the possibility of too high speed, because it is impossible to achieve that kind of speed in this era. But I didn't expect to put the generator in the engine room, but turning the rotor with consciousness makes the rotation speed quickly reach the design limit. Fortunately, the generator is in the engine room, and his perception is always on the generator, and he can monitor any changes in the generator. Li Shiming controlled the speed and kept the speed within the design limit. He used a tool to measure the power, and since he turned the rotor of the generator consciously, the output of the generator reached 230 volts. This power is definitely a drop in the bucket for a large server. But with this condition now, he didn't want to directly use the generator to start the large server, but to input electricity into the uninterruptible power supply. He connected the 3 copper wires to the input end of the uninterruptible power supply, and his consciousness maintained the control of the generator, so that it could continuously input current into the uninterruptible power supply. When he saw that the indicator light of the uninterruptible power supply turned green, he knew that the first step was successful. The uninterruptible power supply has started to work. Although the input current is small, as long as the current is within the limit of the uninterruptible power supply, no matter how small the current is, it will be converted by the current conversion unit and stored in the battery of the uninterruptible power supply at the rated standard. Inside. As the uninterruptible power supply started to work, he found that he could control the uninterruptible power supply completely through consciousness, without even having to turn on the display panel of the uninterruptible power supply. Li Shiming used his consciousness to control the rotor of the generator to rotate for half an hour. He felt a little pain in his brain. He quickly stopped the control of the generator. It seems that controlling the rotation of the generator in the engine room through consciousness is not without consumption. The previous operations he performed in the computer room did not make him realize that these operations required him to consume himself due to the short time. He couldn't know exactly what it was consuming, it should be mental or something. I won't be able to generate electricity during the day in the future. He resisted the pain in his brain and thought. Master, what's wrong with you? Li Shiming pushed open the door of the study, and Saiken exclaimed in a crying voice when he saw that he was shaking and his face was pale. Saiken, don't disturb the others, help me to have a rest. Li Shiming tried his best to show a reassuring smile and instructed. Master, let the doctor come and take a look, your health is important. Saiken stepped forward to support him and persuaded him as he walked to the bedroom. It's nothing, it just took a little more energy. Li Shiming said, knowing his own situation. Although the spirit consumes a lot, the uninterruptible power supply stores part of the power, which makes his spirit in a high state again. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Lying on the bed, his mind entered the computer room. At this time, his mind was not at peace. He does not know whether the large server IBM Z15 can be turned on, whether he can obtain the massive data stored in the server, everything is unknown. This large IBM Z15 server was gifted to the university by many well-known alumni in the previous life, and its value is over 100 million. Large-scale servers are not only used by libraries. Some research projects will also use large-scale servers for computing by submitting applications, but they are only placed in the computer room of the library. The IBM Z15 large-scale server is the top configuration, with 190 CPUs and up to 40 T of memory, integrating 12.2 billion transistors. It is the pinnacle of previous technology. Just because he knows the various books and documents stored in this large server, there are more than 10 million ebooks, including philosophy, economics, law, education, literature, history, science, engineering, agriculture, medicine, management, art, military science, 13 disciplines, 92 university majors, and 506 university majors. In addition to these, there are also published research results at home and abroad, as well as information on research projects in universities. With such a large-scale server in hand, it can completely improve the world you are in to the level of the previous life. Whether the large server can be turned on or not determines his two completely different ways of living in this world. If he cannot start the large server, then he has only one way to go. That is, according to the official road designated by his father Li Wenyuan, he entered the officialdom all the way through scientific examinations and became an official like Li Wenyuan. With the storage space in the computer room and the ability to view the items inside at any time, Li Shiming will be very easy to take the road of scientific research. Li Shiming is not reconciled to living an ordinary life. Although there is some knowledge in the memory of his previous life, which is similar to making a generator, there are not many that can be completely memorized and implemented, and even less to meet the requirements of this world. There is very little he can do without the help of large servers. And with the help of a large server, there are countless possibilities for his path. Thinking in his heart, he controlled the uninterruptible power supply to turn on the power supply connected to the large server IBM Z15, and then started the large server IBM Z15. The lights on the large server cabinet lighted up, and Li Shiming sensed that the power in the continuous power supply was rapidly depleting, and just a start, it plummeted to close to the warning line. He was anxious, knowing that if there is not enough power to support it, a short-term power outage will most likely damage the components in the large server. His consciousness was invested in the large-scale server IBM Z15, and he instantly grasped everything about the entire large-scale server. The big energy consumer is the self-check of the CPU and memory. He uses his consciousness to control the shutdown of each CPU, leaving only one CPU to work, and the memory is also reduced to 64 guaranis. Except for the Linux system and a small amount of free space, the rest of the storage units are also closed. This all at once reduced the power consumption of a large server to a level acceptable to today's uninterruptible power supplies. The large-scale server IBM Z15 is much more complicated than the uninterruptible power supply. If he was not very familiar with this large-scale server IBM Z15 and maintained it for a year, he would not be able to operate and process it consciously in a short period of time. Consciousness in the large server IBM Z15, this angle is completely different from opening the cabinet to observe. He can clearly perceive the internal structure and working method of each component. When his consciousness probed the display processor, a familiar interface appeared in front of his eyes, which was the Linux graphical interface of the large server IBM Z15. He tried to operate the Linux interface and found that it could be controlled normally. His eyes became the monitor of the large server IBM Z15, and his consciousness became the mouse and keyboard. He didn't open the data stored in the large server, which requires activating the closed storage space. Opening those data requires opening more storage units, which will consume a lot of power. He currently does not have such a demand, and he does not need to increase the power consumption. He created a document and tried typing on it. He found that there was no need for an input method at all, and with his consciousness, words appeared one by one. He remembered a text he recited when he was in school, Zhu Ziking's back view. Just when he was thinking about typing out this text, a complete article appeared on the document. Although the number of words in the whole article is not many, it appears at the same time in an instant, and the typing speed is beyond imagination. He mobilized the memory of this world again, thinking in his mind to type out all the scriptures he had memorized. Selected Classics and Meanings is a collection of classics and meanings articles compiled by several generations of scholars in the Li family. It is similar to the 5-year high school entrance examination and 3-year simulation in the previous life. This time, it was also in an instant, and a huge amount of words appeared on the document. It was nearly 2 million words of all the selected classics that the predecessor had recited. He saved the document and named it Jing Ai Xian. He has a strong feeling that after copying it like this, the nearly 2 million word part of the classics and meanings is deeply imprinted in his brain, and he will never forget it again. As soon as Li Shiming thought about it, he would remember any text in the selected classics. He tried to leave his consciousness from the large-scale server IBM Z15, the memory-like memory disappeared, and returned to the normal memory before. He was not disappointed. Although he still needed to rely on the large-scale server IBM Z15, as long as he was connected to the large-scale server IBM Z15 for a long time, it was equivalent to reading the selected classics of classics every moment. You must know that this kind of reading is not a paragraph reading, but a reading of nearly 2 million words at the same time. Although I can't see anything in a short time, even if I leave the connection of the large server IBM Z15 for a long time, I believe it is not much different from connecting to the large server IBM Z15. When you have time, go and record the remaining 4 million words of the Jing Ai Xian into the server. Li Shiming said to himself with joy, but after sensing the power in the uninterruptible power supply, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Patted his head. He almost forgot an important thing. He turned on the storage unit hard disk array of the large server IBM Z15 and searched for information about chicken hen beads. After seeing the chicken mother beads, he had an idea whether he could use the poisonous Yin Wang chief dart head of the chicken mother beads. But he was worried that if the chicken mother beads were ground into powder, the effect of the poison would be too slow. He remembered that he had seen reports of chicken hen beads in his previous life, and there were reports of the highly poisonous medicinal value of chicken hen beads. After checking the information on the server, he learned that the highly toxic ingredient in the chicken hen beads was acacia soy protein, and he found a method to extract the acacia soy protein in the data. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. But to extract acacia soy protein, phosphoric acid, ammonium sulfate, and glycerol are needed, as well as a centrifuge. He transferred the required data into memory and turned off the power-hungry hard disk array. He has all the relevant information in his hands. Although he is not a chemist, he has the confidence to extract the chemicals he wants in this world. He wrote down a bunch of materials with Magian, and added a few more after thinking about it. Everyone already has glycerin, and sulfuric acid must be prepared before making ammonium sulfate, then only nitric acid is needed to make nitroglycerin. After being hijacked by the chief dart head of Wang, he understood the dangers of this world. He needs something to defend himself, not to mention harm, at least able to resist external threats. Master, the medicinal materials have been brought to you. The little servant Mo Yan called from outside the study. I need these things in an hour. Li Shiming handed the list to Mo Yan and instructed. The little servant Mo Yan looked at the list in his hand, and after seeing the name on it, his face became bitter. Young master, even if I was young, I broke my leg, and 1 hour is not enough. I'm not worried about myself, but I'm worried that I won't be able to fulfill the master's orders. Mo Yan said with a flattering smile. You won't find a few more people to run errands, just say it's my order, and I'll reward you if you do it well. Li Shiming said with a wave of his hand. Master, it will be delivered within an hour. Mo Yan heard the reward, and no longer had any objections. He turned around and said. To say that the items on the list are not easy to buy for others, such as some minerals, they are all things that are hard to see. But using the relationship in the mansion, there are a lot of them that can be found directly from the Nanling Mansion treasury, but it's just a little troublesome. Li Shiming's consciousness returned to the engine room, and this time he focused on the generator. The crank handle of the generator has long been superfluous. He consciously operated and removed the crank handle of the generator and the 2 sets of gears. With a crank handle and 2 sets of gears, it is not difficult to retrofit a manual centrifuge. In particular, he put the wooden boards and tools into the machine room, and operated with consciousness, and the rest of the required parts were easily produced. The world's first centrifuge was made. Looking at the centrifuge in front of him, he thought of one thing. Since he could operate it directly with his consciousness in the computer room, why did he make this centrifuge? In an instant, the joy of creating the world's first centrifuge disappeared, and he began to reflect on his own way of thinking. An hour later, various materials and case files were sent over. During this time, Saiken brought back a small box of about 50 chicken mother beads. Li Shiming took the stove and the casserole, and did not ask the Saiken to help, so he started to cook according to the prescription of Mr. Wang's head. What no one knows is that in his computer room, various materials have already been processed. For greater safety, he used a wooden plank to separate a separate space in the corner of the computer room. In order to avoid the impact of chemical substances on the equipment in the computer room. In fact, if it is manual operation, it is still somewhat difficult to prepare the specified chemicals by chemical means from these raw materials. But in the computer room space, with complete control, this work becomes extremely simple. In the computer room space, he can perceive the micron level of matter and any changes that occur inside the matter, which makes chemical experiments extremely simple. Without the need for laboratory equipment, his consciousness can act as a container. Phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, nitric acid, ammonium sulfate, glycerin, acacia soy protein, and nitroglycerin were all prepared by him, and more than 50 chicken hen beads were shelled and turned into a little liquid acacia soy protein. Who would have thought that this little liquid can kill many people, and it can be regarded as the most poisonous thing in this world? You must know that this is not a naturally formed poison, but a poison purified by scientific means, which should not have appeared in this world to some extent. As for nitroglycerin, a few kilograms of nitroglycerin were prepared, sealed in a closed jar and placed in the warehouse of the computer room. After finishing these, Li Shiming found that the medicine was not ready, which shows how smooth the operation with consciousness is in the computer room space. He was thinking about a plan in his heart. He would not underestimate Wang's head. In the process of preparing chemicals, Li Shiming found that without a good stove, he could not get ultra-high temperature using wood as fuel in the computer room space. Although there are very few opportunities to use ultra-high temperature in chemical experiments, he thinks more. For this reason, he got some paper and pen to draw some parts and materials, and handed it over to the little servant Mo Yan. The little servant Mo Yan won a lot of rewards for his work. After getting the order, he patted his chest and promised to deliver it soon. Regarding Li Shiming's sudden purchase of these bizarre things and the fact that he made the medicine by himself, Saiken and the servant Mo Yan didn't ask much. The young masters of other families went out to eat, drink and have fun, but the young masters of his own bought some innocuous items. Even if he increased his knowledge, it was not a big deal, and it was not their turn to comment. Li Shiming picked up the case file brought by the young servant Mo Yan. Outsiders may not be able to access such files, but as the prefect of the prefecture, he issued an order, and no one in the Nanling mansion would refuse. The case file records are very detailed, describing the case from multiple perspectives. Among them are the testimony of the prostitute, singing and dancing girls, waiters, and guests of Tianxiang Tower, as well as the conclusions of the investigation on the scene. It can be seen that the dossier is extremely professional. Tianxianglu is a well-known brothel in Nanling Mansion. The third floor was taken down by the Weiyiwan Security Bureau that day. Chief Guard Wang and 7 guards met on the third floor. A man in white suddenly appeared and killed 7 darts in a row. According to the guests on the second floor, the multi-story floor on the third floor was shattered by a terrifying force, and the head of Mr. Wang fell from the broken floor, and then escaped through the window. The legs of the man in white radiated cyan light, and then chased out. Everyone on the second floor was unable to describe the face of the man in white, and that man's face seemed to be covered in a layer of fog and could not be seen clearly. And the man in white had a chilling aura, and many of the people who saw the man in white became incontinent on the spot. In the final conclusion of the dossier, he suspects that the man in white is a cultivator. After seeing the immortal cultivator in the dossier, Li Shiming had a feeling of crossing over again. There are immortal cultivators in this world, but he did not find this in the memory of the original body. This cannot be blamed on the original body. The original body is just a 15-year-old scholar who focuses on the 4 books and 5 classics every day. The original body has fewer friends. On the one hand, he is focused on reading and has little contact with people. On the other hand, it is also a problem of his age. Normally, scholars in the same city will always communicate frequently. But how did the 15-year-old Li Shiming fit into the group of talented scholars who were all adults? Among these talents, there are not many talents in their 20s, and there are not many talents about the age of Li Shiming. This is not to say that there are no young scholars in the huge Nanling mansion, but only 1 or 2 young scholars appear every 10 years or so. The young scholars before Li Shiming were already in their 20s. The original body does not want to associate with those who have the heart to make friends with the powerful, so naturally he has fewer friends after coming and going. I don't have many friends, and I only read the books of sages and sages, which made my predecessor's knowledge very narrow, and most of my memory is about reading. Of course, Li Shiming was a little fortunate about the original body's situation, at least in this way, he didn't have to be careful with people all the time to avoid revealing his faults. No wonder Mr. Wang wants to hide in the government office. It turned out that the person who was chasing him was a cultivator. Li Shiming secretly said in his heart. Director Wang's head was chased and killed by immortal cultivators, indicating that he had something to be spied on by immortal cultivators, which made Li Shiming interested. If this world is just an ordinary world, then Li Shiming can make use of the computer room space to make a breakthrough in this world. But if he cultivates the world of immortals, his plans will change. Looking at it for a long time, it is the desire of life, even if there is the slightest chance, he is willing to try. After Li Shiming boiled the medicine, Saiken asked Saiken to take the food box, and put the boiled medicinal bowl in the food box. Saiken, don't follow me, I'll go to the garden. Li Shiming ordered the food box. Under Saiken's puzzled eyes, he left the yard. When Li Shiming walked into the garden, he didn't see the head of the Wang, but he knew very well that the head of the Wang must be looking at him. He came to the rockery where he was designated to meet. At this time, the sky was a little dark, and the plants around him were shadowy. Master Wang, I brought the medicine. He put down the food box and said. Young master is really trustworthy. Chief Guard Wang turned his head out from behind the rockery and said with a smile. His face was paler than in the daytime, and it seemed that his injuries were more serious than Li Shiming imagined. Li Shiming opened the food box, revealing a large bowl of medicine inside. Director Wang sniffed the smell hard, and his face showed satisfaction. He is an old man, and he can tell whether the medicine is right or not just by smelling it. He chose Li Shiming precisely because although Li Shiming is smart, he is like a blank piece of paper. A young man who only knows how to read, has a very low chance of resisting after being threatened. With Li Shiming's social circle, and the prefect's family, there are only two masters, the prefect and the son, and it is even less likely that he will come into contact with any dirty things. If he wants to come, it is difficult for Li Shiming to find poison. It's not difficult for Li Shiming to buy other things, but as the prefect of the prefect who dares to sell poison to him, it will be a big trouble if something goes wrong. Besides, based on the experience of Director Wang's head, poison can't escape his nose at all. He has been specially trained in this regard. Without the ability to identify poisons, how to hold darts outside has long been fascinated by people. In fact, there is really no problem with this bowl of medicine. It is completely prepared according to the prescription of Mr. Wang's head, and the medicines used are also the best. Li Shiming took the medicine bowl out of the food box and brought it to Mr. Wang's head. Director Wang, I have already done what you asked me to do. When will the poison in my body be cured? He asked in a deep voice. Director Wang is very satisfied with Li Shiming's attitude. This kind of emphasis on life is exactly what he wants. This medicine will be brewed twice tomorrow, and I will give you the antidote tomorrow night. Chief Officer Wang reached out his hand to take the medicine bowl, and said with a light smile. Also ask Chief Wang to speak up. Li Shiming said with an ugly expression. After he finished speaking, he picked up the food box and turned around, as if he was angry because he couldn't detoxify. In fact, he was worried that once the head of the chief dart of Wang was poisoned, he would have the energy to kill him on the spot to vent his anger, so he hurried away. Just when he handed the medicine bowl to Mr. Wang's head, he took out the acacia soy protein from the computer room, and put all the acacia soy protein inside the medicine bowl. Since the acacia protein was directly sent into the medicine bowl, it was not immediately fused with the medicine, and even if there was any smell, it would not be noticed by Mr. Wang. Not to mention that the amount of the acacia protein is not much compared to the medicine bowl, and it doesn't have the slightest odor. Even if it goes directly into the medicine bowl, there is a high possibility that Mr. Wang's head will not be able to find it. The so-called ability to distinguish poisons is to be in constant contact with all known poisons, and to be familiar with the taste characteristics of these poisons, so as to achieve the ability to distinguish poisons. And the acacia protein has never appeared in this world, and the ability to distinguish poisons cannot detect this kind of poison. Li Shiming quickened his pace and walked away from Chief Wang's head. Director Wang couldn't wait for a long time, so he picked up the medicine bowl and poured it into his stomach. The injury he suffered was not light. He used temporary medicine to support him before, waiting for the treatment of this healing medicine. As the medicine entered the body, Mr. Wang felt a familiar heat in his head, which was the effect of the healing secret medicine. But immediately he felt difficulty breathing again, his whole body trembled uncontrollably, and his body temperature rose rapidly. The medicine is poisonous. Director Wang wanted to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat and couldn't come out. Under the action of the acacia soy protein, which was 20 times the lethal dose of ordinary people, the injured body quickly reacted. The intense abdominal pain and muscle spasms made him unable to even move. Director Wang thought of Li Shiming's handsome face. He couldn't imagine that he was poisoned by a scholar, a young master, or because he was on guard. Extreme shame and unwillingness to make him want to regain control of his body. The inner chi stirred wildly in the body, trying to expel the toxins in the body, but he didn't even know what the poisons were, and he didn't know how to deal with them at all. In the bowl of medicine just now, in order to absorb the medicine faster, he mobilized his inner abdomen to strengthen the absorption. At this time, it was too late to think about getting rid of the toxin. His face turned purple because he couldn't breathe. Li Shiming stood behind a tree 20 meters away, and with his increased 5 senses in the darkness, he could still see the situation on the head of General Wang through the moonlight. When Director Wang's head was poisoned and fell to the ground, he did not go up to check, but waited quietly. The acacia soy protein he prepared himself, according to the information, is a substance that is very easy to be absorbed by the body. After taking it, unless you are in a hospital with a very high medical level in a previous life, and you need to know exactly about the what kind of poison is it, otherwise it can't be saved. At the end of his last days, Director Wang still didn't understand why Li Shiming was so stubborn and willing to die with him. He saw with his own eyes that Li Shiming took the 3 days Duanhun pill, reading www.uuganshu.com. As he said, the Sanri Duanhun pill cannot be lifted in time by any famous doctor except the unique antidote. Confused and unwilling, he stopped breathing. Li Shiming still didn't move. He stood behind the tree and watched the head of the dart. It was not until he confirmed that Mr. Wang's head was 10 minutes long without the slightest hesitation in his chest, and then he confirmed the death of Mr. Wang's head. He carefully walked to the corpse of Director Wang's head. During this process, he had been vigilant enough. He didn't dare to be careless in dealing with this kind of old man. Li Shiming looked at the corpse of Director Wang's head, and the horrific appearance of death made him feel like he wanted to vomit. In the past life, he was an ordinary person, and in this life, he was a scholar, and he had never touched a corpse. You must know that the chief dart head of Wang was killed by him, so he was calm when he killed him for the first time. He found a branch from the side, and rummaged through the body of Chief Dart Wang's head. Except for a sword, Mr. Wang's head is just some broken silver, and there is nothing else. Li Shiming knew very well that the Immortal Cultivator would not seek trouble with Chief Officer Wang for no reason. He also started a massacre in Tianxianglu, killing 7 guards from Weiyiwan Security Bureau. It is known from the case file that it is extremely rare for people who cultivate immortals to commit murder, and Nanling Mansion has not recorded it in recent decades. The official side also suspected that the chief guard Wang had what the Immortal Cultivator wanted, and that would lead to the murder. Li Shiming wanted to kill the chief guard Wang, not only because he was afraid that Chief Guard Wang would go crazy and hurt the people in the mansion, he was also interested in what the cultivators wanted. Now that Director Wang is dead, but nothing has been found, which makes him a little disappointed. Li Shiming thought that the first time he met Mr. Wang in the garden was at this rockery. The place where Mr. Wang asked him to meet was the rockery. If there is a treasure in his hand, if he does not put it on his body when he is being traced, it will definitely be placed in a place that can be observed at all times. Perhaps the head of the Dart Wang put the thing somewhere near here, but Li Shiming didn't move the thing on the head of the Dart Wang, but found it around. Li Shiming also knew that from his own experience, he couldn't see anything. He thought of the large-scale server IBM Z15 that uses the space of the computer room, but only if what his eyes see can be directly received by the large-scale server IBM Z15. To make the eyes input, the eyes should be added as the input device of the large server IBM Z15. He tried to add an entry device in the settings of the Linux system. He let his consciousness connect to the entry module, and the system prompted to find an available device. No need to install drivers, available devices are automatically installed. This is the first time for Li Shiming to operate the large-scale server IBM Z15 by going deep inside the components. After several attempts, he successfully made his eyes become the legal input device of the large-scale server IBM Z15. He scanned around the rockery with his eyes, and recorded the nearby environment into the large server IBM Z15 to form a video file. Then he closed his eyes and kept repeating the video he just recorded with his consciousness. He has little experience, but as the number of repetitions of the video increases, some anomalies will always be found. I found it. After a minute and a half, he repeatedly observed the video file for nearly 100 times, and finally found the abnormality. Li Shiming came to the southern corner of the rockery. The grass here seems to be the same as the grass next to it, but the average height of the grass here is a little higher than the grass in other places. The average height of this point cannot be seen with the naked eye, but after the large-scale server IBM Z15 is digitized, the difference can be compared. In just 1 minute, the power consumption of the large-scale server IBM Z15 reached the warning line. Mr. Wang has a lot of experience in hiding things. If Li Shiming hadn't used a large server to calculate and compare, and only checked it with his eyes, Li Shiming would never have been able to find it. Li Shiming carefully dug up the turf, revealing the wooden box underneath. The moment he saw the wooden box, he was full of surprises. Opening the wooden box, there are 2 books and a small sword made of wood. The small sword made of wood is densely covered with patterns, and these patterns can even be compared to the printing process in the previous life, which is extremely clear. He took the small wooden sword in his hand and found that the small sword was very heavy, weighing about 8 pounds. This little sword is not an ordinary thing, maybe it's an immortal item. This weight made him determine the extraordinariness of the little sword. He put Xiaojian in his arms, and only then picked up 2 books. 5 Elements Breathing Technique and Introduction to Runes, these are the names of the 2 books. Li Shiming quickly flipped through the 2 books, and after thinking about it, he put the 2 books back in the box. He thought of one thing. Chief Guard Wang died, but the Immortal Cultivator didn't die, and he would continue to investigate. He didn't know the means of immortal cultivators and whether they could find it here. It's best to make a false impression, and let the immortal cultivator find them, and they will only think that there are only these 2 books in the box. Anyway, the 2 books have been recorded into the large server IBM Z15 by him, and they can be called up and viewed at any time. The 2 books were recorded, and the power of the large-scale server IBM Z15 also entered a dormant state, and it could no longer be used without supplementing the uninterruptible power supply for a short period of time. After doing all this, he carefully restored everything, and the turf returned to its original state. He put the corpse of Boss Wang's head into the computer room space again. To be honest, he didn't want to do it at all, but it would be even worse for Boss Wang's corpse to be placed in the garden. He cleaned up the scene, especially the place where the head of the chief dart fell, and removed all possible traces. Only then did Shi Shiran return to the yard. The greatest pressure in his heart was gone, and he felt relieved. Before going to bed at night, he used his consciousness to drive the generator, and he didn't fall asleep until he was sluggish. The next day was relatively calm. The government did not find anyone who cultivated immortals, and it was even more impossible to find Chief Wang. But on the night of the second day, Li Shiming, who was in the courtyard, heard the sound of the drums. That was the sound of the drums only when something happened in Nanling Mansion. He hurriedly left the hospital for inspection, and was encountering Mo Yan, a young servant who came to report. "Young master, something has happened. Wei Yuan escort has been wiped out. Including the whole family of Guard Wang's head, all 35 members of Wei Yuan escort have been killed." Mo Yan reported to Li Shiming. Li Shiming's expression changed. No need to think that this must have been done by the Immortal Cultivator. Perhaps the Immortal Cultivator came up with this method without finding Chief Wang's head. Only by destroying the Wei Yuan escort, killing the entire family of Boss Wang, and making Boss Wang crazy, can he force Boss Wang to come forward. It's just too cruel. 35 lives were killed just like that. This is Nanling Mansion. No wonder Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com is beating drums. Probably not only mansion soldiers, but also troops from nearby Nanling Mansion will come here. Li Shiming was even more worried. What the cultivator was looking for was in the garden, and he couldn't guarantee that the cultivator would be satisfied when he found the box. The wooden sword in the box was put away by him. If the Immortal Cultivator was looking for the wooden sword, then the mansion would be in big trouble. He didn't know if he could fight against Immortal Cultivators with the strength of the government. There is a high probability that he would not be able to deal with it. Perhaps, before the Immortal Cultivator finds the box, it is necessary to add an insurance policy. "Mo Yan, is what I want ready?" Li Shiming asked in a deep voice. "I'll rush it, and it will be delivered tomorrow morning." Mo Yan hurriedly assured him after hearing his questioning. Li Shiming no longer thinks about building a furnace. He originally planned to build an electric arc furnace, but if the materials are available tomorrow, it will take a lot of time just to make silicon carbide rods, not to mention that the power stored in the uninterruptible power supply is not enough. If there is an electric arc furnace, he can use his consciousness to process some fine metal objects, and he can make a sharp weapon that can defend himself. Unfortunately, there is a lack of time, so he can only think of other ways. With a move in his heart, he had a new idea. He carried out chemical debugging in the computer room space and obtained a small amount of white phosphorus using the simplest method. With the large-scale server IBM Z15, there are more than 10 ways to make white phosphorus. He does not have high requirements for white phosphorus, so he arbitrarily chose the fastest method that can be obtained at present. After obtaining the white phosphorus, he went to the garden again and put some chemicals in the wooden box underground next to the rockery. After doing this, he wiped off the traces again. He did everything he could, and the rest was up to luck. Shi Ziming stood on the eaves. His body was as light as a feather, and his legs shone with blue light. "This time I came to Daxia for a legacy." His talent is not very good, and it took him more than 20 years to cultivate to the 3rd level of qi refining. This strength is at a very embarrassing level, and a cultivator who normally walks outside with a qi refining cultivation will not be lower than this strength. And after practicing for a long time, he didn't have the time to master many combat skills, and even robbery didn't have the strength to do it. If it weren't for some of the resources passed down by his ancestors, perhaps he wouldn't even be able to reach the 3rd level of qi refining. When he inadvertently flipped through the notes left by his ancestors, he saw an essay written by his ancestors, which mentioned that a friend of his ancestors returned to Daxia after being seriously injured and unable to find his way to immortality. In the essay, he described that his ancestral friend was lucky enough to get a top-grade magic weapon in the early stage of qi refining. High-grade magic items are not available to most cultivators in the late stage of qi refining. It can be seen that the high-grade magic tools are precious, and the top-grade magic tools of ancestors' friends are still high-grade attack magic weapons. Perhaps Shi Ziming's ancestors wrote it down as a memory, but after Shi Ziming saw it, he first thought that if he could have a high-grade attacking magic weapon, then he could rob most of the middle and low grades. Order monk. Although the low-level monks could not last long with the high-grade attacking magic weapons, even the middle-level monks could not stop the low-level monks from using the high-ranking attacking magic weapons without good defensive magic weapons. When he thought that this was his immortal fate, he came to Daxia. However, he has nothing to do with the world. When he was inquiring about the descendants of his ancestral friends, the news leaked. The ancestor of Mr. Wang's dart head is a friend of Shi Ziming's ancestor. The inheritance left by Mr. Wang's ancestor has become the foundation of the Wang family. The inheritance of the ancestral head of the chief dagger is not only the inheritance of immortal cultivation, but also the inheritance of several top martial arts. In the world of immortality, the inheritance of top martial arts is not of high value, but it is these kinds of top martial arts inheritances that make the Wang family masters come out in large numbers. This generation's chief is an accomplished master, and Wei Yuan is one of the major escorts in Daxia. Mr. Wang also knew the importance of inheritance from his ancestors, so he took precautions after learning that someone was listening to his ancestors' information. On that day, the escorts of the agency were called, and when they were preparing to deal with it, Shi Ziming found them. The 7 darts tried their best to block, so that the dart head Wang was able to escape from Tianxiang Tower, and relying on his familiarity with the surrounding environment, he successfully escaped Shi Ziming's pursuit. Shi Ziming didn't think that the chief dart head of Wang would be so cunning. A worldly master was nothing in front of him, a third-level Kyrfaning cultivator. He thought he would be captured, but he was careless and let the chief dart off his head. Body. Because the incident at Tianxianglu was a bit big, especially when many scholars were present at the time, several scholars were injured, and 7 lives were lost, so the government was trying to pursue Shi Ziming. Shi Ziming wasn't afraid of the government, but he didn't want to make too much trouble with the Daxia official before he got something. Once there is too much trouble, the Xianmen behind Daxia will send a cultivator to deal with it. A cultivator who can be dispatched to perform a mission is not something he can deal with as a small third-layer qi refining. It was for this reason that he didn't make trouble anymore, he just used some means to track the head of the chief guard. However, when he checked almost half of Nanling City, he didn't find the head of General Wang, which made him no longer rational. Shi Ziming found the Wei Yuan escort, killed everyone in the escort, and used the blood of the direct line of the escort's head as a guide, and used a low-level bloodline tracking talisman. What made him extremely disappointed happened. This low-level bloodline tracking talisman, which had pinned his hopes on it, did not find out the exact location of the head of Chief Wang's dart. There are 2 possibilities for this. One is that the head of the chief guard has left Nanling Mansion for more than 500 miles, and the other possibility is that the head of the chief guard has died, so the low-level blood tracking talisman will be invalid. Shi Ziming, who was standing on the eaves, gritted his teeth and took out a new tracking talisman. Different from the tracking talisman he used before, this tracking talisman was extremely rich in inspiration. This is an intermediate level Qi tracer, and this intermediate level Qi tracer is one of the few things left over from his ancestors. One intermediate level talisman was worth 100 pieces of the same kind of low-level talisman. With Shi Ziming's third-level Qi refining strength, he himself could not draw an intermediate level talisman. Using an intermediate level talisman to track down Immortal, the thought of it made his heart aches. When I track you down, I will take out your soul and turn your corpse into a corpse. He said reluctantly while taking out a piece of clothing from the storage bag at his waist. The clothes were found from the Wei Yuan Escort Bureau. They were the clothes of the head of the Wang, and it had the breath of the head of the Wang zone. He mobilized his spiritual power and activated the intermediate tracking talisman in his hand. The intermediate tracking talisman turned into a ray of light and landed on the clothes. Then, using the intermediate tracking talisman, he felt the action root of Chief Wang's head. The middle-level tracking charm is valid for 3 hours. As long as the whereabouts of the head of the Wang is still in Nanling City, Shi Ziming has the confidence to find it. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Even if Mr. Wang's head dies, all the places he passes by will leave qi. He searched the Wei Yuan escort bureau, but did not find the inheritance. He used some methods to find out from the family of Mr. Wang's guard that Mr. Wang had taken away an item. So, whether or not you can find the chief guard Wang himself, it is still a high probability to find that item. Shi Ziming added a primary light body amulet for himself, which allowed him to maintain the effect of being as light as a feather. This time, in order to achieve his goal, he was extremely extravagant, and he kept using the talismans that he was reluctant to use. According to the chi clues given by the intermediate tracker, his figure jumped on the buildings in Nanling City. Half an hour later, he came to the outside of the mansion. Feeling the instructions of the intermediate tracking talisman, he finally understood why he hadn't found the chief dart head before. It turned out that the head of the Wang was hiding in the palace, and the most dangerous place was also the safest place. Who would know that the person Shi Ziming and the government are looking for is hiding in the government's government office? Without any hesitation, even if he was discovered by the officials, he would also enter it. The direction of the air machine is in the direction of the back garden, and the high courtyard wall is regarded as nothing by him. He jumped up and jumped over the courtyard wall, stepping on the tree canopy with both feet, tracking the chi machine forward without touching the ground. There is no one in the garden. Li Wenyuan has been very busy recently. There are only Li Wenyuan and Li Shiming in the Li family, and there are not many servants. A large number of people have been dispatched to investigate the major events that have occurred in Nanling Mansion in the past few days. Although Shi Ziming's strength is weak, it is also for cultivators. With the help of the primary light talisman and his perception, he went deep into the garden without disturbing anyone. He's been here for a long time. Shi Ziming felt the prompt from the intermediate tracking talisman, and judged according to the intensity of the chi machine. In front of it is a rockery, which is a relatively remote place in the garden. After a while, a puzzled look appeared on his face. Because he only sensed the chi movement of the head of Wang Zong's head here, but did not perceive the chi movement of the head of Wang Zong's head leaving. Normally speaking, Chief Wang's head should still be here. Even if Mr. Wang's head is dead, if the body is removed, there will be clues of chi machine left behind. But the chi here shows that Mr. Wang's head is like disappearing out of thin air after staying here for 2 days. Although Shi Ziming was deeply puzzled in his heart, the most important thing was not to find the head of Mr. Wang, but to find the item. With a wave of his hand, a green light flashed. He didn't do well in the world of immortal cultivation, but it wasn't that he was good at it. What he was best at was planting. This is a garden, and all kinds of flowers and plants are planted everywhere. The wood aura he stimulated can easily sense the condition of the surrounding plants. This is more convenient than Li Shiming's analysis of the large server IBM Z15, but a smile appeared on his face in just a moment. I found it. He came to the location where the wooden box was buried. The aura of a small piece of grass here is not right. After the wood aura is stimulated, this small area is as eye-catching as the lights at night. He reached out and dug out the dirt on the surface, and saw the wooden box. When he saw the wooden box, his smile grew wider. This wooden box looks ordinary, but the pattern on it is a pattern that is often used in the immortal world to isolate the breath. The things stored in such a wooden box are definitely not what the mortal world should have. He didn't take any protective measures. On the one hand, this is the secular world. The hidden weapons that such a small box can stimulate is limited, and the third level of chi refining is immune to secular poisons. On the other hand, he is poor. A primary defense talisman was worth 3 to 4 attacking talismans, so he couldn't afford to waste it. Opening the wooden box, he found that the inside of the wooden box was full of water-like liquid, and at the same time he saw a white powder burnt because he opened the wooden box. If he knew what was in the wooden box, Shi Ziming would definitely run as far as he could, and he would use all the defensive talismans he was reluctant to use. But the knowledge system is different, so it has no knowledge of the liquid in the wooden box and the white powder. He also thought that this was a small trick used by Director Wang, just to destroy the contents of the box if it fell into the hands of others. In a hurry, he hurriedly wanted to take out the visible things from the box. He saw 2 books. The texture is the material used in normal books in the world of cultivating immortals, and it can be preserved for thousands of years. Li Shiming filled the wooden box with nitroglycerin. As for the white substance, it was white phosphorus. I don't know what craft this wooden box is, and its sealing performance is excellent. When Li Shiming came over, he put some of the nitroglycerin in the computer room space into the box, then closed the box, pumped out the excess air in the box and moved it into the computer room space, and put a little white phosphorus on the surface of the nitroglycerin in the box. Nitroglycerin is an extremely active explosive, and it may detonate with a slightly larger range of motion. When white phosphorus comes into contact with air, it burns. Shi Ziming encountered what would happen to burning nitroglycerin. And it happened right in front of his eyes. There was a lot of nitroglycerin. The box contained about 1 kilogram of nitroglycerin. And the power of 1 kilogram of nitroglycerin generates 715 L of gaseous substances and releases heat at the same time. This heat is about 3980 degrees Celsius and the pressure is about 9000 times 105 Pa. Such an explosion happened in front of him. Even if Shi Ziming used a defensive talisman, the primary defense talisman did not need to consider defense at all, and even the intermediate defense talisman had a limited effect. Shi Ziming also reacted at the moment of the explosion, but it was too late. Which fellow deist set a trap? Why didn't he reveal any spiritual energy? With full of doubts, his body was torn apart by a terrifying explosion. The explosion not only caused Shi Ziming's death, but also centered on the explosion. The area within a radius of 5 meters was suddenly empty, and the unfortunate rockery was blown into a sky full of rubble. Li Shiming, who was in the small study, only felt that the whole room trembled, and the violent explosion made people tinnitus. Young master! The piano outside made a scream, calling out to the young master. In Saiken's heart, the young master is her whole heaven. Saiken, don't be afraid, I'll go see what happened. Li Shiming said, comforting Saiken. Young master, don't go, or wait for the government soldiers to come. Saiken grabbed Li Shiming and begged. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Li Shiming patted Saiken's head and said. When he walked out of the yard, he saw the mess on the ground. Although the explosion was in the garden, the scope of the rubble was larger. Many flowers and plants were injured by the gravel, and the dust coiled in the air, forming a grey fog. He knew very well that if he could detonate the secret hand he left behind, there was only one possibility, and that was that someone found the wooden box. Such a secret location, so tightly hidden, and in the back garden of the government office, ordinary people would not be able to find things silently even if they knew it was here. The secret hand he left behind was to deal with the Immortal Cultivator, and it was the Immortal Cultivator who wanted to be bombed this time. As for whether the Immortal Cultivator was killed, you can tell by looking at the tragic situation in front of you. Under such a powerful explosion, the Immortal Cultivator could still survive, and Li Shiming had to doubt that he was not a human being. At this time, the guards and servants in the backyard, on the other side of the mansion, rushed towards the garden in a hurry. Such a big incident occurred in the garden where the prefect lived, which was more serious than the killing of more than 30 people in Wei Yuan Security Bureau. Unlike those who were looking around like headless flies, Li Shiming knew where the center of the explosion was, so he walked straight to the rockery. The closer he got to the rockery, the more horrified he was at the explosion he created. The box full of nitroglycerin caused such a powerful explosion that the original rockery location became an open space. There was a large pit that was 1 meter deep on the ground, and all the vegetation in the area around the pit was broken into pieces. Li Shiming's eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the flesh and blood on the ground. It was a human body torn apart by the explosion. This discovery made him feel relieved, no matter how much loss it caused, as long as the Immortal Cultivator was killed, the biggest trouble would be solved. Then he saw a leather pack fall to the ground. Under the powerful explosion, the leather pack was not damaged at all. Li Shiming stepped forward and picked up the leather pocket. This leather pocket should be worn by the immortal cultivator. The leather belt bag was very small. Li Shiming tried to open it, but found that the opening of the belt bag was fake, and there was no place to open it. It was this that made him more and more understand that this leather waste bag was probably an immortal cultivation item, and he moved the leather waste bag into the computer room space with a slight movement of consciousness. I've seen the young master, it's very dangerous here, you wait for the survey and then report to you. Zhang Huai and a group of guards rushed over. Seeing that Li Shiming had arrived at the scene one step ahead, he quickly stepped forward and said, "Okay, I'll go to my father's side to see." Li Shiming nodded and said, "It's not so simple to check here. There will be arresters from the government office who will come to investigate and form a file to report." Li Wenyuan was working in the government office. After hearing the explosion, he immediately asked about Li Shiming's situation. After hearing that Li Shiming was fine, he was relieved. He didn't go to the scene immediately. The investigation was carried out by professionals. He would bring a group of people in the past, which might destroy the traces of the scene. When Li Shiming came to the office of Li Wenyuan, he saw Li Wenyuan pacing back and forth in the room, looking very preoccupied. "Shiming is here, are you surprised?" Li Wenyuan asked with a smile when he saw him coming in. "Father, I went to see the scene. That's not the kind of damage that ordinary people can cause." Li Shiming bowed calmly and replied. Li Wenyuan was very satisfied with Li Shiming's calmness, but he still had some opinions on the fact that he went to the scene in person. A gentleman does not stand under a wall of danger. When encountering such a situation, his subordinates will investigate it in advance, and then go over if there is no danger. Li Wenyuan said in a deep voice. "Yes, father." Li Shiming replied. "The damage that an extraordinary person can cause seems to be the hand of the immortal cultivator, but I don't know why there is such a big commotion in the Fuzhong garden." Li Wenyuan continued. "Then how are you going to deal with it?" Li Shiming wondered how the official would deal with this kind of thing about people cultivating immortals. "I have already reported it to the central capital in an expedited manner. This kind of affairs related to cultivating immortals is handled by the central capital. Fortunately, it is about cultivating immortals, otherwise I will have a lot of trouble this time." Li Wenyuan thought. What happened recently? I couldn't help shaking my head. As the prefect of Nanling Mansion, he had more than 30 massacres under his rule, and even the Yamen had an accident. If he was really investigated, he might not be able to keep the prefect. But it's different when it comes to cultivating immortals. Immortal cultivators cannot compete with human power, and the government cannot be blamed for incompetence. Will the central metropolis send immortal cultivators here? Li Shiming asked again. People who cultivate immortals are not able to support Zhongdu. I have never encountered such a situation before, who knows? Li Wenyuan was also unable to answer this question. Father and son sat for a while and waited for Zheng Zayatu. "I've seen your lord, I've seen your son." Zheng Zayatu stopped and walked into the room, bowed and saluted the two of them. Li Wenyuan nodded slightly, while Li Shiming responded with a Confucian gift. This is the first time Li Shiming has seen Zheng Ziyutu in a real sense. Zheng Ziyutu is the #1 expert in Nanling Mansion. Zheng Ziyutu gave him a sense of oppression, which made him very uncomfortable. After Zheng Ziyutu found out, he quickly put away his aura. "I really heard about the incident in the back garden just now, and my heart was filled with anger, and I didn't hold back the momentum for a while." "Zheng Ziyutu, can you find clues?" Li Wenyuan asked in a deep voice. "My lord, I was about to report to you that Zuzuo found broken flesh and blood at the scene, as well as fragments of white cloth with a very special texture," Zheng Zayata said while handing a small piece of white cloth. Li Wenyuan took the piece of white cloth. The white cloth was about the size of a palm, surrounded by charred black, which looked like ordinary white cloth. What's so special about this white cloth? He knew that neither Zheng Zayata nor Zozo would lie, so he asked directly. Sir, please allow me to use swords. Zheng Zayata bowed and asked. This is the office of the prefect. If he wants to pull out his weapon, he must obtain the prefect's permission. That's right. Li Wenyuan waved his hand. Zheng Zayata pulled out the knife at his waist, and put the knife to the side of the cloth. With a little force, the blade moved the white cloth, but the cut was not successful. Li Wenyuan didn't need Zheng Zayata to explain, his expression became serious. Although the knife used by Zheng Zayata is not a magical weapon, it is not an ordinary knife. Even if it does not exert force, ordinary cloth will be divided into two parts by one knife. This seemingly ordinary white cloth has extraordinary protective power. I suspect that the piece of white cloth came from the man in white in the Tianxianglu that day. I also checked the flesh and blood at the scene. There is an inexplicable energy in the flesh and blood, and it is completely different from those who practice martial arts. This supports my judgment. Zheng Zayata continued. Li Shiming sighed in his heart that Nanling Mansion is really full of talents, and it took so long to analyze the situation on the spot, and almost came into contact with the truth. In other words, someone killed the man in white in the garden. Li Wenyuan looked at the white cloth in his hand. You reading www.yukanshu.com confirmed in disbelief. The reason why he couldn't believe it was because he could confirm that the man in white was a cultivator. How could a cultivator die so easily? You must know that the 7 dart heads of Wei Yuan Escort Bureau, and the master dart head of Wang, who is a master, are like ants and have no power to fight back in front of the man in white. Sir, this is the common opinion between me and Zozo, and I will send the detailed results in writing later. Zheng Zayata replied with certainty. Could it be the enemy of this man in white? There is another immortal cultivator in Nanling Mansion. Li Wenyuan said to himself, puzzled. Li Shiming didn't say anything. There were too many things that were difficult to explain. He couldn't tell his father what he had done. He thought of the corpse of Director Wang's head again, to see when he would find a place to throw the corpse away, and always put it in the computer room to watch the response. Although he obtained the 5 elements breathing technique, introduction to runes and the wooden sword, he did not study it. The reason why I didn't study it was because I was worried that the immortal cultivator would find out about the research items. Now that the immortal cultivator is dead, he thinks about going back and studying the harvest this time. Shiming, there will be some noise in the house these few days. I will try to keep them away from your yard so that it will not affect your studies. You are tired, so go back to rest first. Li Wenyuan saw Li Shiming's absent-minded appearance and thought that he was shocked and said involuntarily. Li Shiming took the opportunity to leave. Since the death of the immortal cultivator has been known here, there will be no more trouble in dealing with the follow-up. The entire Nanling city was affected by the explosion. The government dispatched Yamen to appease the people everywhere. The government soldiers patrolled the streets. Nanling city was under martial law.